I'm Stephen Curran. I am, well, as you heard from Father Gannon, I had the fortune of having 14 years of a particular parish priest in the south of Glasgow, where I live. I was born in the Diocese of Motherwell, where I was baptised. I went to school in the Diocese of Galloway, where I set up a Justice and Peace group at school in Queen Margaret Academy. I was the chair of the Catholic Society at Dundee University, and my daughter was baptised in St Andrews in Edinburgh Diocese. And for the past 20 years I've lived in Glasgow Diocese. Oh, my grandmother's from Argyll and Ells. I'd like to apologise to Paisley for not having a specific local reference for today. I'm here as the manager of Ecocongregation Scotland. We're an ecumenical charity. I'm delighted. This is a Justice and Peace event. We're supporting all the Care for Creation, what Justice and Peace are doing across Scotland this year. But there are people here from our wider ecumenical movement and the wider church, Catholic and the wider church involvement today from our own perspective, so I'm delighted to see you here today. What we have this week is a fantastic opportunity because our charity, and we've got one of our trustees, Fintan Hurley here, have asked us to support the climate strike. Now that doesn't mean you agree with everything that's said in the climate strike. You might even be uncomfortable with the idea of the climate strike, but what we're saying is we will support the young people in raising this issue. So tomorrow we're facilitating the People's Assembly, which has been held in Glasgow, and we're also supporting a question and answer session for teachers on Tuesday where the young people talk to the teachers. And that's the importance of having a safe place to talk about the climate emergency and what's happening. And obviously we had people who were active in the marching rallies yesterday, which is why we've got an A4 sheet of paper for our banner today. It's somewhere in Holyrood Park, somewhere in Stirling Methodist Church, and there's one in Dundee, so hopefully we'll get our banners back at some point. But this week's important about engaging with young people and intergenerational justice point we've heard earlier. I don't know if you know these two people. The lady on your right, Greta Thunberg. Gentleman on the left, you might have seen him in the news this week. This is Congressman Graves, who asked her a question, and it sums up why we do this work. He said, if I pick one bag of rubbish out of the ocean and China, for example, puts 5 in, why should I bother? And she summed up very nicely. One, you shouldn't put your bag in the ocean in the first place. You should take it out. And secondly, people in Sweden use the same example to say, why should we bother with just a small country in Europe when big countries like America don't do what they want to do? So the point is true for us here today. Scotland has a fantastic potential, but we have to do more because we have the capacity to do more. And regardless of the fact there's a whole big world out there where we can influence that change, we have our own responsibility and we can make a difference here now in Scotland over the coming year. And of course that's one girl taking action last August. Millions of people have been inspired by that action because of the sense of urgency. Now obviously in Glasgow, this is the summary for me really is what is it that motivates people to be involved in eco-congregations. It's local churches, people who are committed to this because of this being God's world and us being tasked to look after it. And you'll see the quote from Genesis there, God planted a garden and there he put the man he had formed. That's about us caring for it. And particularly from a Catholic perspective, we hear this every Sunday, the God of all creation in the Eucharistic prayer. Not just man, not just humanity, not just people, all creation is what we're praying and focused on. And every Sunday from a Catholic perspective, that's at the very heart of the Eucharistic prayer when we hear that, every day at Mass. We know about the motivations people have got. Look at Blue Planet, the pollution in plastic. People understand it, they get it. They get that the damage to the environment is becoming so significant. Air pollution, the damage to extracting tar sands, the oil and gas exploitation, the plastic pollution, huge puddles of plastic sitting in the oceans around the world. But it's happening here as well. And people need to understand that there are issues in our country which we have to address, and I'll mention them in a second. Why do we have to care? Because climate change and global overheating is the biggest problem. The doomsday clock's sitting at 2 minutes or 3 minutes to midnight. It used to be global thermonuclear war, now it's climate change, and it's flickering there. So we have to deal with this now. There's an urgency about dealing with it as a matter of it being the biggest issue. Now the question we ask as Christians is very significant. Who is my neighbour? We know the answer from Scripture, we know the answer from the traditions of the Church, and Pope Francis taking Francis's name. Who is my neighbour? It's not just the person on your street, it's everybody in the world as this common home that we share around the world. There are two big motivators for people who are involved with our movement. One is around the idea of climate justice. This is a subsistence farmer in Africa where drought has meant he can't farm his crop, he can't get the food to look after his family and his village. But we see this in terms of the terrible flooding that's happened recently in Mozambique, Malawi, previous year in South India. Look at the Pacific Islands like Vanuatu that are literally disappearing under the rising water rates. But climate justice also affects people here. There are factories, workplaces, homes that can't get insured because they're on an increased flood risk level with the water rising. There are coastal erosion issues around Scotland as well. So it happens to people now. If your workplace or your home can't be insured because the water level's rising, you're next to a river, that's an issue that affects people now. And it affects people in the worst disadvantage. People who have got the least capacity to get out of that situation are bearing the brunt of this. Overwhelmingly women around the world who are in the worst situation in terms of climate change. But the other thing that motivates people alongside climate justice is intergenerational justice. And Pope Francis asked this in terms of the key question around the encyclical: what kind of world do you want to leave to those who come after us? That's at the crux of it. What kind of world do you want to leave to those who come after us? So that call for action is about what we can do as individuals, in our church, in our community, and that impact nationally and around the world. But it starts at home. It starts at home with all of us. This is an interesting cartoon I like to think about, which is where we can sometimes see the reality that kicks in. It's good. People that have lived in a cave, but actually it's a post-apocalyptic world. Yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. We know the price of everything and the value of nothing in terms of this. The urgency now to change the way we live and behave is so significant. Global overheating is leading to dangerous climate change. There's a loss of biodiversity, the natural world, insects, the world around us, and obviously the pollution of the environment, particularly by plastics, chemicals, the extraction industries is significant. And the biggest factor affecting people's health in the UK is air quality. That's the biggest factor that affects your health. Other issues can be affected as well, but air quality, particularly in the cities, is a big issue. Now, it's easy to say there's a lot of problems. What are the solutions? We are here to support and encourage churches act in their own community. We're a small independent charity. We're not part of one church, but we work across all churches, all over Scotland, regardless of denomination. We have a special relationship with Justice and Peace Scotland and SCIAF and Christian Aid as key partners, and particularly in terms of the campaign focus, which we'll talk about, and how we can influence change amongst decision makers and internationally. We started in 2001. You can't read the small print there, but Father Paul Murray signed on behalf of the Catholic Church and Sister Moira Gallagher on behalf of VAX, along with 16 other church leaders. He's now my parish priest at St Helens, Monsignor Murray, so I have to make sure that I come back to him and say, what are we doing now in terms of that fantastic focus across the country and encouraging churches. We're a charity, so we get funding from other organisations to support our work and to support you in the work you can do in your own communities. We care passionately for God's creation. It's based in faith. It's about Christians working as a community of faith, working with each other and others who care about the environment, but also it's about transformational change individually, in our church, in our community, and nationally. We have a focus on supporting and encouraging churches in a spiritual sense, support to discover what it means to care for God's creation in prayer, worship, and conversation. Now that means a spiritual focus, discussing issues like we've done today, talk about Laudato Si, let's look back at Scripture, let's look back at the traditions of the church. For 50, 60 years, papal encyclicals have spoken about the importance of the environment, but also in worship and congregational life, in your church. In the bidding prayers, do you mention the climate emergency? Do you mention the impact on the natural world? Do you mention the disadvantage that's faced by people in the developing world? And also the idea of prayer. When Jesus was afraid, he prayed, said Bonhoeffer, and we need to realise now people are afraid in this situation. They need to be supported spiritually from a pastoral perspective because they're concerned about the impact of climate change. But also we support and encourage churches in a practical sense to put the care into action where you are in your own community, in your own home, in your own street, in your own village, town or city. And that's about wanting to serve justly in a transformed world. Now that could be about energy efficiency, it could be about encouraging more active travel, walking and cycling. It can be about encouraging more public transport. It can be about doing cleanups in terms of your own community. And importantly, it's about individuals taking action, discussing amongst ourselves what's happening where we are, what are the challenges in that. It's not just about action in church buildings, but that's important. because the church is at the heart of the faith community. But what else do you do from the church? Do you have grounds? Do you have a community you're part of? Do you have other organisations in your area, charities, other local groups who you could help to clean up your area? But also focus on, if you have a need for a change in public transport that's accessible, if you have a concern about pollution in your community, talk about where you're at. And importantly, that phrase, just transition, talk about the practical steps that will be fair to people when we address the challenges of climate change. Don't have the impact falling, as always, on the most disadvantaged in terms of climate change. And the third aspect of our work is about campaigning, how we commit to campaigning on urgent threats to our web of life in the vulnerable world. And that's what we were doing yesterday, raising the issue, supporting the Scottish Youth Climate Strike, but also working particularly with SCIAF and Christian Aid and Tear Fund and Justice and Peace, and engaging with politicians. Invite political representatives to your church, to your Justice and Peace group, to your own community. Talk about your concern about this and ask them what they're going to do about it. Ask for action in a particular regard. And this week, for example, Stop Climate Chaos at climatechaos.scot have got an action. You can email your local MSPs to ask them for tougher action in the climate change bill going through the Scottish Parliament. Now that's local and national concerns, but also it's international in terms of the impact around the world. We'll support you to lobby, to influence, to be informed, to make that campaigning difference around the world. And the three important things that we should always do: think, act and pray. Think about what we're doing, discussing it today, take action, but also praying, realising that we have a spiritual focus on this as well. And it might change the way we use our energy, how we travel, what do we buy, where did your clothes come from, who made them, how much did they cost, did they fly in from the other side of the world, and our finances that we've heard in terms of the ethical finance discussion earlier, but importantly our politics, decisions that are made in relation to addressing the climate emergency. And what you can do, you can register as an eco-congregation. We've got information today. We've got if you're interested, the information on being an eco-congregation, or sign up on our sign-up sheet. And we can support you in terms of the work you want to do in your own community. Also, we can look at working towards an award where we recognise growing levels of information and activism that you do. And importantly, we have local networks across the country. And all you need to say is your church, your group, affirms that environmental issues and caring for God's creation is part of what you're interested in, your life and mission. It doesn't need to be core business. What we have from that as well is the interest in working with you, a local group leading on that, whether it's a Justice and Peace group, parish council, and your own church committee, agreeing action on that. We've got 12% of churches in Scotland are registered with us at the moment, and that means we have 466 at the moment churches committed to this work, but we're going to be writing to every church this year because the huge focus in terms of this is really significant. Our local networks are roughly based on 1 or 2 local authorities around the country, and it's clusters of churches coming together, meeting maybe 2 or 3 times a year, sharing ideas and best practice. And we are Scotland's largest network of local environmental groups. We are the biggest group of volunteers focused on addressing the environment. Our award scheme is relating to bronze, silver and gold. So obviously you do more activism in your community with the silver one, and in the gold one, your whole church congregation is focused on making a difference in that wider community, not just in the church building, but in the lives of people and addressing the climate challenge. We have an environmental chaplain who is seconded to us by United Reformed Church. You'll see him here at Our Lady in St Michael's in Loretto. And he supports a lot of the work we can do through creation time and ecumenical materials this month, which is something that we're doing across the country. And 2 of the contributors are here today, Marion Pallister and Miriam McCarthy. So that's an ecumenical resource focused on this period of the year around creation and support for creation for all churches. We also have action that you can take in your community. It could be around saving energy, giving people training to support better recycling, looking at minimising food waste, looking at cutting down on the issues in relation to the cost of travel and the impact on travel in your community. And we get funded from the Scottish Government to engage with churches on that work as well. And yesterday, of course, the campaign focus, you'll see some of you in this picture here involved in the campaign in Glasgow yesterday. The coming year is significant because, as we've heard already, COP26 is coming to Glasgow. Now this is Copenhagen, who some of you will recognise, usually as the Duke of Wellington on top of him in front of Goma, with his cone on. That is a massive event coming here next year. We have to do more. We have to show that we are leading through the churches. Tens of thousands of people will come to Glasgow, but the churches will be able to host and welcome campaigners and those taking part from countries around the world. And particularly in Glasgow, we have a much more diverse community, where when you go back to the climate strike, a fifth of the young people in Glasgow schools are from a black and minority ethnic background, or have English as a second language. So the diversity is really important from the interfaith perspective that we were talking about in terms of Lorna's answer earlier. We are here to help you. The important question in terms of what you're looking at now is, what can you do in your own community? Think about what you'd like to do. What are the challenges you would face? What would be more difficult for you to talk about changes around behaviour, whether it's cutting back on energy, cutting back on the cost of travel or use of travel in certain ways, looking at issues around eating less meat in terms of food, looking at issues where your community has got a focus on doing something that can be helping the poor, as Pope Francis calls us to, but also helping care for the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen, and you'll see that there's a veritable rainforest's worth of literature over there.